Hi, all. This is Dr. Sage Breslin, and this is Wisdom Wednesdays. So, I thought today we'd talk a little bit about perspective. And, perspective is one of those common factors that everybody talks about, right? We all sort of take it for granted, honestly. But it's probably a little bit more important than you think. I was walking in the canyon and I noticed this beautiful heart rock. And because I have an affinity for hearts, I stopped and I stared at it and I thought, wow, this is amazing. A heart shaped rock. Well, what would happen if I dig it up? Could I take it with me? Would that be okay? And so as I began to kind of fuss away at the edges to see if I could pull it up, I noticed, in fact, that it wasn't heart-shaped at all. It appeared to be heart-shaped because of the environment that it was in, because of how its face popped up out of the dirt, because of how it had been buried, probably because of how the rain had struck that rock face recently, showing what appeared to be, to me, a heart. So I let it be. I left it there. But it really got me thinking about how many things impact us as a result of the perspective that we take and the perspective often that we keep until something big happens. And sometimes it can be as some sort of environmental impact. As I said, like the rain uncovering just enough dirt off this rock to make it appear heart-shaped. When we're in unhealthy relationships, we see what we want to see. Oftentimes, when we first begin a relationship with someone, we might notice a habit and think it endearing, quaint, funny. But after living with that habit, say for 10 or 15 or even 20 years, or days or weeks, we no longer find that habit endearing or quaint or funny. We find it irritating. The perspective changes due to our exposure. When we're in violent relationships or really toxic relationships, we may have to eliminate the perspective that we keep because it wouldn't allow us to remain. And sometimes there are factors that require us to remain, or so we think. For instance, you might be in a violent relationship and yet you have children with your partner. And so you believe that you have to do everything you can do to stay with that person because of the children. It's ever so unfortunate that, that probably is not the healthiest thing to do, because then we expose the children to that. And what they learn is, mom or dad isn't leaving an unhealthy or violent relationship, but is instead staying. And that is what we do, instead of realizing, no, that's not what we do. So, in those circumstances, we may discover that we're maintaining a perspective that's unhealthy because we have to stay in our minds. Versus once we finally get the motivation to leave or the courage to leave, we look back and we see that the perspective was really, really twisted and unhealthy. And we can see, if we'd only been able to shift perspective and see things for ourselves, rather than seeing it through a perpetrator's eyes, everything would have shifted. So, as you think about how you are maintaining or shifting perspective in your work, in your relationship with yourself and even your body, consider the impact that perspective has. Is there anything that you notice you might need to pivot on? Is there anything that you might notice would really benefit you from just shifting your perspective just to make sure you're not missing anything? So If you think it's a heart, yeah, it might be a heart. But if you think it's a heart and it's just a square, might want to rethink that. This is Wisdom Wednesdays, and this is Dr. Sage Breslin.